Hi, I'm Timothy Wynn, and you are listening to the Audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series, Beyond Your Narrator episode.
Today we have a very special guest, Kim Charlson, who is the American Council of the Blind immediate past president and executive director of the Perkins Braille and Talking Book Library. Thanks for joining us, Kim.
Thank you, Roy.
It's great to have you. Let's jump right in and ask you what you love about audio description.
Oh my gosh, that's such a huge question. How many hours do we have, Roy?
This is a podcast. It's unlimited.
Audio description for me is, I guess it goes back a long way. I'll tell a little bit of how I got started at the very beginning. It goes back even to my family when I was younger, and we used to go to the movies, but when I lost my vision at age 11 and we went to the movies, people would get really irritated with my parents because they were whispering to tell me what was going on. And so we stopped going to the movies as a family. We didn't do it anymore. And it was something that I missed, but we just didn't do it anymore. And I went to high school. I went to movies with my friends, but didn't make a big deal out of, well, tell me what's happening, because I just didn't want to seem like I wasn't cool, and didn't know what was happening. Of course, I just knew, but not really. And college, and then my husband, Brian, and I moved to Boston. WGBH, the public television station, is nearby Perkins, where I work. And they reached out because they were doing some research with audio description, and they wanted to test it and what blind people thought about it for television. And I thought it sounded interesting, so I coordinated a group of about 20 or 25 people to come in and listen to an episode of Nova. And we listened to that, and after the show was over, I can remember so clearly, the whole room just sat there for like 10 seconds in total silence. And then we all started kind of talking at once because we were so excited about actually watching a show and being able to know exactly what happened throughout the whole show and be clear and confident about what had happened. And we were all so excited about it. That was my first introduction to audio description. And that was in, I would say it was in 1986, I believe, was my first introduction to ever hearing something that was audio described. We did some further work with WGBH, and in 1990, they launched audio description for public television and did some other work with movies and home videos on VHS tape. And that was really popular. People loved that as well. It's really been a journey, certainly, because from the VHS tapes, very accessible. You could pop those right into your VHS player, and you didn't have to worry about any settings or anything like that. Well, that was short-lived, so to speak, as we know where VHS tapes went. Mm-hmm. And DVDs came along, and that was a little more challenging for the blind community because while there was description of the movie on the DVD, we had the added accessibility complication of not being able to independently get to the menu to turn on the accessibility and the audio description. So that was a bit of a challenge. As a librarian who believed in making things accessible, I had been providing audio described movies for my borrowers at the Perkins Library in Massachusetts, and had to make that tough decision. Well, do I buy DVDs that have no accessibility, or do I not buy them? And it was hard, but I made the decision to buy them and to mark them with a sticker that said this DVD may, does not have voice navigation. You may need assistance to start the DVD, which killed me as an advocate to have to do that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if I didn't buy those DVDs and make them available when they were out on the market, people wouldn't have access to that. So we had to kind of compromise there and then keep trying to work with industry for some kind of standardization for that. And it never really happened, unfortunately, that we tried to advocate for some kind of press the one button on your remote for 5 seconds and it would pop into audio description turns on. Industry really could have cared less and wasn't really worried about whether blind people could access the DVDs or not. It just wasn't important to them. So no matter what we did, it just didn't seem to make an impact. So we were a little discouraged about that, but continued to purchase DVDs and as they go from now with audio description on them. But there's so many other ways now to get accessible audio described content. So streaming and television, and it's just unbelievable where audio description has come in basically the last 30 years. We're talking about 30 years of the ADA, and it's kind of 30 years of audio description as well.
It seems like some people are even surprised to hear about that, as you said, in 1986, the audio description has been around for so long. And it sounds like also that complexity that you addressed with the DVD accessibility and the settings, that as there's more ways to get audio description, the complexity seems like even that's complex, that there are some similarities, there are some differences. I'm thinking about the cable boxes that have voice, something similar to Siri where you can ask it to turn it on versus a menu bar that's buried deep in some sort of menu tree.
Exactly. No, you're completely right, because really description started with live performances, but so much of our focus, certainly the last 10 to 15 years, has been media based, but we'll get back, I'm sure, to touch briefly on the live theater, because it's a passion of mine as well. But accessing television is no simple feat either for many people, because you need the secondary audio program channel to get to the channel where the audio description is broadcast. And a lot of people don't like to leave it on all the time, because if it's not doing audio description, generally it is broadcasting Spanish. So if you don't speak Spanish, you really do not want to leave it on all the time, because you're not going to be able to have the regular English language programming available to you. So you have to be able to get easily in and out of audio description. It's not as much of a problem today, I would say, in most metropolitan areas, but in areas where there's pretty significant Spanish-speaking communities, it still is a little bit of a problem, because there's so much more Spanish content in those communities. It's almost a battle between the audio-described content and the Spanish content. We're looking forward to some of the new regulations and technologies that are going to be coming forward in the next couple of years with respect to television, and sort of the next generation television that I understand will have more capacity to separate channels and potentially have audio description on its own channel where it will not have to compete with Spanish language content. So that'll be really nice for television broadcasting.
And that battle that you addressed between the two competitions between audio description and Spanish language, that's a system battle, that's a manufactured battle that obviously the streaming companies have overcome, considering I'm thinking of Apple TV Plus that has multiple languages of audio description that, those barriers. If I heard you correctly, you said that the new television,
somebody much more technical than I will be able to tell you all about that in one of your future podcasts, but it really is supposed to make it a lot more seamless with respect to broadcasting audio described content, and people won't have to worry about switching it on or switching it off nearly that much. I know I tend to leave my description SAP channel turned on, and in the major metropolitan areas, most of the content audio is broadcast through on SAP, the commercials, everything, plus the emergency broadcast messages. It's been mandated for the last year or two that by the FCC that all broadcasters must be able to provide the narration of the crawl that goes across your screen when there's some kind of a storm or emergency in your community and you hear the alarm or the beep on your TV. You're able to switch over to the SAP channel and you're supposed to hear a narrated voice. It might be text to speech, it might be human, but it's supposed to be narrating what that crawl on the screen is reading for you so that you'll know what the emergency is. Most of the time it's weather-based, but it certainly can be other kinds of emergencies as well. And that is a requirement for all broadcasters all across the country. It doesn't matter what size community you are. You have to be able to broadcast the emergency messaging to anyone who's on the SAP channel. So having that capacity tends to make advocates believe that, it's a lot more possible for those communities to broadcast other content. If they could broadcast the emergency content as a requirement, then they have the infrastructure in place to broadcast other audio described content if it were made available to them. So it's not an issue of they have to purchase more equipment. They have the necessary equipment. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to see more expansion of the communities all throughout the country that are covered by the FCC as mandated communities that can receive audio description. Because right now there's only 60 communities that are required to pass through audio description. Everywhere else it's voluntary. And we're hoping that that number will go up as high as 100 communities they're metropolitan area communities, so that there'll be more access to audio description for people through television.
If we went back to that compromise that you had in the Talking Books library when you were considering buying the DVDs and ended up choosing that was a compromise of taking that small step and adapting, and that as technology has changed and even as mandates have changed, just the fact that there are voluntary communities outside of those 60 communities, as well as the streaming services that are currently, through whatever reason, whether it's cultural pressure or behind the scenes discussions or what, that it's starting to happen. Can you, it just seems like we've talked about this before, that it's like the Wild West with audio description and access. Can you see technology and mandates working together, or maybe working separately, or maybe it's not that clear cut?
I'd like to see them work together more effectively. I mentioned the new standards for television are going to make it much easier for producers and providers of description to pass through the content. The major cable providers and that kind of thing will be able to, they won't have to worry about, is this going to be Spanish or English? Because audio description will have its own channel. And Spanish audio description can be more of an option for communities. Right now, it's very challenging to get Spanish audio description for broadcast television, because it's either going to be English audio description or Spanish language, but Spanish audio description kind of falls to the wayside. So with the new standards, hopefully it'll be possible. Just as you mentioned with Apple Plus TV, they've managed to figure out how to stream multiple 8, 9 different languages of audio description for a given program. And that's, in my book, that's pretty amazing. So having the technology is there, but a lot of the advocacy work is in the political arena, in the regulatory side, and in the political side as well. And so those environments, as we well know, don't always cooperate or collaborate with one another. So it's often a balancing act to try to get the regulatory side to work with advocates or to work with industry to make some of the advances that we have had in the audio description arena. And I guess a really good example of that would be the work that ACB, the American Council of the Blind, in the area of streaming services, because we spent a lot of time working with the television and cable providers to make their set-top boxes, as you referenced, accessible so that we could figure out what was on television and how to access what was on television, which was great. But it really moved into the next generation, so to speak, because of litigation that was filed in the First Circuit Court by the deaf community, the National Association of the Deaf, with respect to Netflix and wanting to have closed captioning on streaming video. And that case was settled, with the settlement basically being an agreement to provide captioning and recognizing the accessibility requirements and needs for consumers of Netflix services who are deaf and hard of hearing, and the benefits that captioning provides to those citizens. So when that decision, that settlement agreement was reached, many of us in ACB felt that it was an opportunity for the blind community to piggyback on that same philosophy and try working with Netflix, reaching out and using structured negotiation, which is a legal strategy that ACB has been very successful in using, where you do have attorneys, but you don't file a lawsuit. You basically prepare a demand letter with your case outlined. And in your demand letter, you outline all the issues and you say, we believe that our case is very strong. We would prefer collaboratively and put our resources towards solving the problem rather than fighting each other in court over this issue. Because we believe that the precedents in this case would be on the side of the American Council of the Blind, as an example. So we've successfully used structured negotiation, and we did with Netflix. We sent a letter. We worked with them and our attorneys from DRA, Disability Rights Advocates, based out of Berkeley, California, and New York City, and worked in the settlement with Netflix. And that was the first streaming service and the first structured negotiation case in the streaming arena for ACB. And as history will show, it's been amazingly successful. Netflix has been an incredible partner to work with. They've done a tremendous job of, agreeing to describe their original content and try to get as much described content as they can to make it available on their service. Is there content, there that is not described? Yes, but they do absolutely try extremely hard to get as much described content as they possibly can. And if there's an issue and we point it out to them, they're really cooperative about working on it to fix any little glitches that might come about. So it's been a pleasure to work with them, and they really have demonstrated themselves to be, a good partner in the world of audio description.
You used the word partnership twice. That it sounds like after this structured negotiation that Netflix, as a accessibility focus, turned a corner and that they recognized the value beyond just the structured negotiation. I don't want to imply that the structured negotiation was just a nudge and that was it, but it does sound like that did its job and that there's a relationship there between ACB and Netflix that continues to grow outside of that structured negotiation.
I think that's true, and they really continue to work at it, to make it work. They're interested in what the community has to say about, description that they're doing, and they participate in conferences and ask questions and are really, truly, genuinely interested in getting feedback from consumers of audio description that they have on their original content.
In your experience at ACB, whether with Netflix or other companies, have you found that feedback from audiences does make a difference to the companies?
I like to think that it does. And in most cases, I would say that, yes, it does. They want to do the best job. Certainly they can. They're all working hard to put out a product that they want to stand behind and be proud of. Occasionally it's a little rougher sometimes to work with some companies. And I know they're trying, and I continue to give them credit, but I still feel like it's a bit of a struggle. We're working with Hulu because we had a similar structured negotiation agreement with them, but it's been a lot harder to get the same kind of responsiveness and feedback, I guess, than what we had with Netflix. And every company's different, and I tell myself that we need to take into consideration that there's different factors involved and different processes, and they do things differently. But it has been more of a challenge to advocate and support our need and our wish for more description content from Hulu and their implementation of their structured negotiation agreement. It's been a lot slower. So not every case goes super smooth. I wouldn't say that Hulu is going badly. I just feel that it's a little slow and it's a little bit more of a struggle, but we're monitoring it and we're on top of it, and we're trying to be as encouraging and supportive and, give them the feedback that they need to do the things that we think they need to be doing in the time frame that we both agreed on. So that's kind of where we are with Hulu at this point, which was our second structured negotiation with a streaming service.
Are there any similarities or differences in the way that you found either talking books or audio description could relate?
It's a question that I have certainly thought about, and it's a question that I haven't come up with an answer to that I'm satisfied with. But there's a lot of interest in the audio, of course, because audio description is all about the audio for us. The video is a bonus for our family and friends, but we're really most interested in the audio. In the talking book library world, because the technology of the CD and the accessibility or lack thereof of accessibility to the DVD has been such a barrier. I've often thought about, couldn't we do something with the audio of movies and films to make them available to people that don't have DVD players, that don't have the technical ability to change the settings and do all the hoops that you have to jump through sometimes to get to the special services or accessibility menu on a DVD or a computer screen, and make some of these audio described movies more accessible in some way. But it's such an open, complicated area when you start to get into licensing rights and copyright and all that kind of thing, that it's really never been something that I've been able to move ahead on, because there's just so many issues around, who owns the audio rights? Can you distribute those, free of charge, because it's a lending library program, if it's protected, which all of the materials in the talking book program are. They cannot be played by the general public. We have a special player that we use for every one of our audiobook borrowers that protects the copyright and the rights management issues. So, but it's just one of those things that we haven't been able to get over the hump as far as figuring out how would it work and how could we make it work. But it would be wonderful if there was a way that it could be done. And there just hasn't been the success that I wish there would have been for that.
Earlier you mentioned about live theater. Is this a good time to talk about that?
Oh, sure. I love live theater. I talk about that any day. And it's really, my experience with live theater started pretty early when I came to Boston. So it's been something that Boston has brought into my life, and I just love live theater. I'm pretty devastated since we had the pandemic that there hasn't been any theater in my life for over 6 months. And it's just like, I never go that long without seeing at least 3 or 4 plays and a musical or 2. And it's like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen anything in that live theater world for, it seems like forever now, but someday it'll be back and I can look forward to that. But I've done a lot of work with the theaters in Boston. When I first started going to live theater performances, we had one theater that did live audio description for their shows, and they still do. That's the Wheelock Family Theater in Boston. They were the first. Then we had the Wang Center for the Performing Arts, and they're a big theater, so they bring in the traveling productions, the big shows, as opposed to the community theater, which is more what Wheelock is. It's a university program as well. Today, we have about 8 or 9 different theaters that are in a season. I actually produce once a year for library patrons and audio description enthusiasts in the Massachusetts area a season schedule, all of the theaters that do live performances. And I put that together and make it available in large print and braille and email. And so people will have the schedules for every theater, what days. And it also serves as a way for me to help the theaters so they don't schedule their performances on the same day, so that we as the community don't have to make the hard decision about, oh my gosh, there's 2 shows happening today. Which one am I going to go to? I'm able to help the theaters realize that, maybe it'd be better if you did the show the previous weekend instead of that weekend, because you're going to be competing with, Fiddler on the Roof that's coming in, and that's the Broadway cast, and that might be a hard thing to compete with. So that's been really helpful to the theaters because, of course, they want to get as many people using the audio description services as they can, because in some communities, the live theater and the audio description is done by volunteers. In some communities, it's paid. In the Boston area, the describers who do theater are paid by the theaters. So it's a paid position, like the sign language interpreters are paid. It is not a volunteer assignment. So I think we've got a very high level of professionalism. The theaters do Braille programs. They do a pre-show, orientation and set design and give you some background information prior to the start of the show. And that's all really great information to have. It was 2002 now, I co-authored a book with two other colleagues called Making Theater Accessible, A Guide to Audio Description in the Performing Arts. And that book is used a lot by trainers around the country. We make it available free on several websites as a PDF. It can be given as a handout because, we haven't updated it or anything, but I think most of the fundamental concepts are pretty standard. The resources may be dated, but I think the principles around audio description and things you need to do as a theater are all still very useful. And it's used quite often for training new describers, and theater organizations use it. So that was helpful. And I guess the other piece of my work, I wrote a chapter for a collection development book in the field of library science about collection development for libraries in the area of audio described materials and what you can collect and how to grow a collection of audio described materials for your library and where you can purchase materials and that kind of thing. So that was kind of the beginning of libraries thinking about having audio described content and being able to catalog it correctly and make it available and those sorts of things for sharing.
Thinking about how that experience with the collection development seems very similar to something else, maybe like the audio description project. Are there any contributions that you've had there?
Well, yes. The American Council of the Blind really has taken audio description to be really one of its primary programs and services within the organization. So we started in 2000. Yeah, it's been 20 years of the audio description project. So, and we have a director of our audio description project, Dr. Joel Snyder, who works with us on areas of promoting and encouraging the development of audio description. And I think you've had Joel on your podcast previously, and he is a tremendous expert. I mean, one of the original individuals who started audio description and has a definitive textbook in the field on training and audio description. Just, everything you'd like to know about audio description, he's written a textbook about it. So ACB has really worked in this area, and the Audio Description Project and our website is really the go-to place, acb.org/ADP for Audio Description Project is really the go-to place for information about audio description, what's happening. We try to keep the news, what's going on every week. We update the website. We've maintained a list of all the DVDs that come out with audio description, all of the movies, shows from all of the streaming services that you can find. It's like a master title index of what's available with audio description. We maintain that on our website. So I know a lot of professionals that use the website if something's described or not, and where they can get it. Is it iTunes? Is it Netflix? Is it DVD? Where do they go to get something? And it's a tremendous service. Plus, we also keep track of what movies are coming out, what TV shows have description, what networks are carrying what programs, because that changes all the time. Shows get canceled on television. New ones come along and they have description. And so we have a consultant working with our project that keeps track of all the television programs and what they're doing to make sure that that stays up to date. And our webmaster, Fred Brack, does a tremendous job of really keeping our website fresh and interesting, and it's resource, a reference site. It can really answer almost any question. It's got resource documents, all kinds of different materials, and you could just spend hours and hours and hours there looking and finding all kinds of treasures. I think there are a lot of great material.
If you were to think about 2 to 5 years from now, where would you love to see audio description go?
Well, one place that I'm really hoping audio description can go, and can go more quickly, would be some of, ACB again has worked hard in the legislative arena with the 21st Century Video Accessibility Act to get the mandate in for audio description in 2010 to have audio description for television. That's been very successful. We've hit the ceiling on what the legislation talks about as far as the number of hours, and that is 87 and a half hours per quarter per provider. So that's the 4 major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, and then the 5 top cable providers based on the Nielsen ratings. So 87 and a half hours of description per quarter. That's not very much when you think about all of the hours that those 9 stations are available and what kind of content they have. So I guess my number one wish and hope and determination is going to be to really work toward expanding and increasing the availability of audio described content on television and increasing the number of hours required, and have some kind of a formula available so that it obviously can't go from 87 and a half to 100% at one moment in time. That's impossible. But to create a schedule for increasing the number of hours that's reasonable for the community, that's reasonable for the producers, and gets us to a place where captioning is today. Because I don't think that there should be any difference between what's on television with captioning and what's on television with audio description. It should be whatever we want to watch that's out there should have audio description. It doesn't cost that much to make programs accessible with audio description. You just work it into the budget and do it, because you have to do the captioning. You should have to do the audio description as part of the production process. There's a lot of money that's made on a lot of shows, and a few $1,000s to make some audio description available is not that much a price to pay.
I'm thinking about the nearly 30 million blind and low vision Americans, let alone worldwide, that are, I'm assuming, pretty loyal followers when it comes to having access to the same content that sighted audiences get.
Absolutely. And one thing that's impressed me over the last year is actually some commercials. If you turn on your SAP and leave it on, you're going to see that more and more commercials are actually putting audio description on commercials. And why not? Why shouldn't a company or an advertiser want to invest that one extra to reach a market that's got, like you said, 30 million potential individuals paying attention to that product? Because I can tell you, I tune out commercials that don't have description, but when I hear one that does, I pick up on it instantly and I listen to that commercial. So I know the products that have description. And we really need to give a shout out to Procter & Gamble, because they have really led the way in doing this. And they have an individual on their team who's responsible for accessibility named Samantha, and she is Latif, and she is just a tremendous advocate for audio description in all their product lines. Procter & Gamble owns all kinds of other product lines. So sometimes it might be paper towels or tissues or diapers or soap, but other times I've seen commercials for cars and that have description as well. So other industries are picking up on it as well. And again, why not? The money of people who are blind and visually impaired is just as green as everybody else's money. So why not advocate for that and audio describe and work to get, their portion of our dollars as well?
I'm going to add the word together that it sounds like this is a collaboration, that this is a win-win. It's not an adversarial relationship. Going back to the Netflix partnership that you have established after the structured negotiation, that this is really an opportunity.
That's right. I think it really is. If industry will look at it as an opportunity, it really seems to me like it is an opportunity. We're not wanting to hit them over the head and say, do this or else. We want to say, this is what we think you need to do, and we're here to help you make it possible, because there's benefits. There's benefits for us and there's benefits for you. We really believe that. By working collaboratively, I think what they gain is if they're going to do it, they're going to do it the right way and not do something and invest in something that at the end they think they did a great job, but they never asked us what we thought. And at the end of the road, we say, this doesn't work for us. If they had talked to us all along the way, we could have said, this is how this would work best. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, nothing about us without us, which is a mantra that a lot of advocacy organizations for people with disabilities use, but it's so true, because we're not demanding that industry or government or society do these things for us. Be part of the solution, and we want to help make the solution possible.
Thanks for sharing that, Kim. Is there anything else you'd like to share? We haven't even started talking about wedding videos being audio described. I mean, that's a whole episode.
That's true. I actually have seen a couple people who have had their wedding described, and I just thought it was phenomenal. So it's pretty amazing. One other area that I'm working in, which I think is kind of interesting and has, I think, some real positive effect on the government side, but also just on the quality side, and I know that's something you're passionate about, is some work I'm spearheading with the Academy of Certification of Vision Rehabilitation and Education Professionals, which is a mouthful. We call it ACVREP. And they are the certifying body for several different professions in the blindness field, such as orientation and mobility instructors, certified rehabilitation teachers, certified low vision therapists, certified assistive technology instructional specialists. So those are several examples of the kinds of certification that ACVREP has done and manages for the field. I am working as the chair of a committee, a subject matter expert committee, on certification for audio describers. Audio describer, or CAUDIS, is the acronym. The field of certification likes acronyms for their certifications, so it's Certified Audio Describer, or CAUDIS. And we're working right now on developing certification criteria, a whole process for a describer, an audio describer. And the definition of the audio describer is the individual who writes the description for, a play, or there are so many kinds of things that can be audio described, and we have to make sure that we capture that in the writing of the audio description, which is what this certification will be covering. So it's live theater, of course, but it's also media, which is anything on film or digital, websites, educational videos, training videos, outdoor events, sporting events, museums, art, exhibits, conferences, parades. I mean, there's just all kinds of different things that can be audio described. And our certification development is we have to prepare a scope of practice, which identifies all the different things that a describer needs to know, and then a body of knowledge, all the skills they need to know to be a describer, and then the competencies they need to fulfill the certification. And then ultimately, what we're going to have to prepare is the examination itself and the questions to get the test validated so that the certification can stand and the field will be able to certify audio describers, which will be a step toward the professionalization of audio describers. I don't want to see people, saying, oh, that's just a volunteer job that people have. Now, that's not meant to say that what volunteers do and provide that service around the country isn't important, but it's also important to realize that to professionalize it, and people need to get paid to do audio description, and they need to get paid appropriately to do it. And it is not a world where everybody should do this out of the kindness of their heart. And so the industry needs to realize that there is there will be a certification process. And so it's very important to the field, I think, and we're working on that now. So.
Very exciting. And you had said earlier about the nothing about us without us. Is there room for blind professionals in audio description?
Wonderful question. And absolutely, yes, there is. I know several outstanding audio engineers who are contributing to the field, and people hire them every day. And I think for the most part, many of the people that hire them to do work don't even know that they're blind because the work is done remotely. They're either on the phone or using Zoom or something like that, so they don't even meet them in person. But the quality of their work has spoken for itself in how good it is, and they hire the engineer to do a project. So, can a blind person do audio description as in the writing of description? I would tend to be a person who said my first choice would not be to do audio description writing. It could be possible but no matter how you slice it and dice it, you're going to need, if you do that, you're going to need sighted assistance. So it doesn't seem like the most effective way to focus your talents as a blind person. I think it's better to focus your talents on being a consultant to audio describers, helping them to make their description the best it can be, or being an audio engineer and creating wonderful sounding audio description as an engineer or a voicer. There are blind people doing voicing of audio description. And the end product, no one's ever going to know that voice was done by a blind person. They're talented and skilled and know their job and know what they have to do. So I think there's many opportunities within the field, but as with anything, I think blind people that are in those positions within the field of audio description have to work twice as hard to prove themselves. And that's unfortunate, but no different than what it is in most other, because there's always the doubts and the mistrust and misinformation about what blind people can do and the expectations of what blind people can do. My expectations are that blind people can do what they set their minds to do, and they're going to do it well, because it's not to their advantage to do it badly. So they're going to do a good job at it because they want to be successful and they want their projects to be successful.
That's great. And professionals get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kim, thank you so much for this. Is there a good place to follow you, either on social media or stay in touch with you? Maybe a website?
Absolutely. I am on LinkedIn. People can also check in with me anytime as far as email if they have any questions and would like to follow up. It's Kim Charlson, all one word, KIMCHARLSON @acb.org.
Great. Oh, thanks so much for joining us today, Kim.
Thank you for having me. And congratulations to you on all your super great work. I think I've told you before, your podcast is terrific, and it's an honor for me to be a part of it. And I really enjoy it, and I hope your listeners will enjoy this segment today and get some information from it. So thank you for having me on.
When I was growing up, I was, I guess, what you'd call kind of a precocious child. I liked to read, and I liked music. I really liked going to movies with my family. I was sighted until I was age 11 when I was diagnosed with juvenile glaucoma, which is an eye condition that very gradually takes your vision away. When I started to lose my vision, still we would go to the movies. It was something we did as a family. But as my vision loss progressed, I couldn't tell what was happening on the screen. And so my parents would have to describe, and they'd whisper to me what was happening. It often would upset other theater goers who would hear whispering, and they'd tell my parents to hush up and not to talk. And we just stopped going to the movies altogether as a family, and that became something that we just didn't do. I grew up, and I didn't really do movies. For a long time, I just blocked it out and thought there wasn't anything I could do anymore since I couldn't see. When I moved to Massachusetts in 1985, I became connected with a lot of the organizations around the area, and one of them was WGBH. I was approached by WGBH to help test a new service called Descriptive Video Service. They had a pilot test to see what the blind community would think. We got together as a group of about 25 people and watched a program.
A star explodes into a cloud of pink and purple gas. In the middle of the cloud, the word NOVA appears in black capital letters.
It was a NOVA program with description, interspersed in the pauses of the dialogue, telling us what was happening. When the show was over, we all sat there totally silent for about 10 seconds because we just couldn't believe that we had sat through a television program and we actually understood what had happened. Who would have thought that making television accessible for people who are blind and visually impaired was something that a major television station would even be interested in doing? The blindness community said to WGBH, "We love programming on television. It's great, but what about the movies?" They picked up the challenge. They've worked with all the motion picture studios to get movies accessible. The first movie that I went to see in a movie theater was the movie Titanic. It was really exciting for me because I got to go to the movies like everybody else, and I got to buy some popcorn like everybody else. It was something that I hadn't done for over 30 years. Even though I can't see the screen, it's the same thing that everybody else is doing. It's a total experience. And Titanic was such a big movie. I just loved every word that came through the headsets that told me what was happening.
Jack's face grins beside hers as they soar over the waves from their solitary perch.
One of my favorite scenes was when Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet were standing out on the prow of the ship, looking at the setting sun and the reflection on the water. I really lost myself in the whole movie experience because I could understand it, I could follow the story, and it was really a major experience for me. I even sat at the end and I listened to every credit for that movie because it was described and I could do it. I didn't have to say, well, who played so-and-so? I actually went and saw Titanic with description in the movie theater 3 times. Since I went to Titanic for the first time, audio description has grown tremendously. And now people who are blind and visually impaired all across the country have the whole experience of going to the movies. I can go with my friends and my family and my husband, and they don't have to tell me what's happening. Having access to television and movies again, which was something that I had so much enjoyed when I was younger, really brought back something that was missing in my life. It took 30 years for me to have that opportunity, but WGBH made it possible.